Okay, thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? Really appreciate your participation tonight. I know it's a very sunny evening and lots of things to pull us away from this, so appreciate you being here. I just want to recognize all those folks that are here. I recognize most of you, in fact, maybe all of you, but if I haven't met you yet, my name is Rob Watson, and I'm the superintendent of schools from Missoula County Public Schools. Let's see, this is my second year in the position. And last year, when I took the position as superintendent, the board requested that one of the very first things we do is we start working on our strategic plan. The previous strategic plan sunsetted, I believe, in 2019 or 2020. So there was a need from the board to revisit the process and go through it again. And what I really appreciated was that the board really wanted to take an active role in the process. And to that end, we solicited the help of the Montana School Boards Association. And Deborah Silk is on with us this evening, and she'll introduce herself here in a minute. But the Montana School Boards Association works with school districts across the state on a very similar process to this. And so we were very lucky that they agreed to help us. What was very interesting is we started in January of last year, and I think we got 2 sessions done. And we were heading into our 3rd session, which was the later part of March. And then, of course, everyone went into shutdown mode. So this was before any of us were very proficient on Zoom or Google Meets or anything else. So we kind of just put everything on hold for quite a while. We'd been talking about the strategic plan. We looked at the notes that we gathered from folks last year. We started to put some things together, but really weren't quite ready to pull the entire group back together until things were a little more calm and a little bit more normal. So we've had a great school year so far. It's been challenging in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways we learned a lot, and really appreciate the staff that is on the Zoom this evening. Amazed at the work that they've put in this school year and the efforts that they put in to try to make this school year as best as it could be. And it was not an easy task, but our teachers and our paraeducators and our school principals, everyone working together, our school secretaries, our custodians, everybody working together to really make this the best year that it could be. And so I'm excited to see a lot of those folks on the Zoom this evening. I also see a lot of community partners that have worked with us in the past or hoping to work with us in the future with various sort of programming within our schools. I'm excited to see you on this evening as well. As I said, we continued this in the background, even though we put a pause on it publicly. We continued some of the strategic planning processes, looking at the draft documents that you submitted last year, some of the comments you submitted last year. And then first thing we did is we went back to our school board with some of these documents and had a couple of great discussions with our school board. We also have a few members of our school board on this evening as well, and so would welcome them. Would want to just remind everyone that the strategic planning process is an important process for us because it really helps us guide the next, not only the next 5 to 10 years, but also some of the basic tenets that we support in our district that will guide us for the next 30 years. So this is a great process, and I'm encouraged to see this amount of participation. I also want you to know that it is a school board process, and so these listening sessions are important for us to get a draft document, and eventually that draft document will go before the school board. They'll take public comment, obviously, as they do on everything before they would officially adopt anything. But I'm excited. I'm excited that you're here this evening. I'm glad that we can continue this process. And I'm going to turn this over to Deborah Silk, who's going to introduce the first topic and introduce herself as well. Deborah.
Thank you, Rob. And also thank you to Hatton for arranging this and being the wheel behind what we're going to do tonight. I'm pleased to see that we have, including myself, 35 people on this call. And as Rob mentioned, we have a number of trustees, we have members of the administrative staff, we have members from the staff and the community. So great group of people. I think most of you on this call know who I am. I'm the Associate Executive Director and General Counsel with the Montana School Boards Association. Happy to report to anybody that will listen that in my 25 years of being an attorney, I have advocated on behalf of public schools my entire career. People always ask me, how did you ever, get into this line of work? Is that something that you aspired to? And quite frankly, when I was in law school, you never know what field you're going to go into, but had an opportunity to first work in Boise, Idaho. And I know that some of you on the call know that I was born and raised in Butte. I don't disclose that to everybody, but to my closest 35 friends on this call, I'll let you know that. At any rate, we really appreciate all of you being on this call. And as Rob mentioned, this is really a continuation of the work that all of you started last January and February. I'm going to put up a PowerPoint here, and trust me, it's not my intent to lecture you for 2 hours, and I'm sure that you're glad to hear that. What we're planning on doing is having you work and look at and refine some components of the strategic plan. So if you'll bear with me for a minute, I'm going to put up the PowerPoint. And for those of you that were involved in the sessions last January and February, this will look familiar to you, although I did cut it down quite a bit for purposes of tonight's meeting. Let's see here. Can everybody see that okay? Okay. So remember when we started this process back in January of 2020, one of the reasons, and Rob referenced it a few minutes ago, when Rob became the superintendent in Missoula County Public Schools, in essence, there was a chapter of the school system and of the community, quite frankly, that you had accomplished. And I think what the board and staff leadership, with input from staff and community, really wanted to look at is, where do we go from here? Now that we've sort of in essence, met the goals that we have set, they wanted to set the stage for the future success of Missoula County Public Schools. And what you see on this screen, a lot of what we follow and talk about here is really modeled after Jim Collins, and quite frankly, Glenn Tecker, who's also a renowned strategic planner that happens to work with the MTSBA Board of Directors and staff. I've had the unique privilege of training under Glenn Tecker in terms of strategic planning and strategies that work for public schools. So one of the things that we always have to remember is that when you're engaging in this type of a process, it's not intended to change everything that Missoula County Public Schools is doing. What it's intended to do is I always characterize this as planting the flag, articulating who you are and what you stand for, and stimulating change around everything else. I think even though we're on a Zoom call, and it's different when you're on a Zoom call than when you're in person, but I think we've learned a lot of lessons since last March in terms of the capacity, the innovation, the adaptiveness of our public schools in terms of meeting that constitutional goal that we have in Montana of meeting the educational potential of each child or person in this state. And one of the reasons that we thought it was important to gather this group tonight is, number one, we're going to be looking at a couple of components that you guys have already looked at before we move on. But we always want to remember that the purpose of this process is not to come in here and wholesale change everything you're doing, but plant the flag, articulate who you are, what you stand for, what you value, and then stimulate change around everything else. So when you're looking at strategic planning in any public school, one of the reasons, and I always tell trustees this, it would be a much different process if, for example, the Missoula County Public School Board and the administrative team and myself, if we were all sitting in a room and trying to develop a strategic plan, a visionary plan for the district, it would look much differently than it would without those of you on this call, quite frankly. So the more input that we have, the better off that this is going to be, the more informed people are. And one of the things about strategic planning, aside from the fact that the district is developing a plan to ensure not only its success, but the success of each student into the future, one of the benefits of this process is it helps establish, number one, clarity and consensus about the direction that you're going. And remember, school boards can't do this in a vacuum. If they don't have the collaboration of their staff and of community and parents, it doesn't work. And trust me, I know from doing this over a number of years, it doesn't work if people don't understand what you're doing and the direction that you're going. You always have to remember too, that part of this process is transparency, making sure that your input is heard, making sure that you understand where the district is trying to go as a school system, and then identifying, and let's face it, whenever you're going through a strategic planning process, we can all sit here and talk about pie in the sky or the summit of Mount Everest in terms of what you want for yourselves and what you want for the district and the students that you're serving, but there are going to be barriers to your success. And part of this process helps you identify what those barriers are. And I think it also helps you identify what some of the drivers to success are. And again, I think we've learned lessons during this past year about some of the strategies that you can implement that enhance student learning. So again, in terms of strategic planning, it requires a collaborative visionary approach. Remember that when we're going through this process, we are not developing an operations plan. We're not deciding exactly what we're doing, who's doing it, and the time frame for doing it. So as you go through tonight's meeting, I want you to be thinking about being on an airplane. I want you to be thinking about this from the 30,000 foot level, from a strategy and visionary perspective, and not a boots on the ground perspective, okay? And sometimes that's hard for any of us to get our heads wrapped around, but you wanna be thinking about big picture, big ticket items that have big impact on the students that you're serving. Part of this process also requires a commitment to follow through. I always tell school boards and community members that if you're going to take the time to go through this process, and I know it's a priority for Missoula County Public Schools and those of you on the call, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But you have to make sure the whole purpose of putting this together is to establish what your priorities are, both on a long-term and short-term basis. And then you have to have a commitment to regularly revisit and refine this, because let's face it, if we had finished this process last March, we would be sitting here right now refining what you had done, right? Just based upon the change in the dynamic. So the point that I want to make there is this is intended to be a process that is nimble, that is adaptive, that is flexible and innovative. So there's no right or wrong, response or discussion when we're going through this. And again, just reminding you to try and think about it in terms of the 30,000 foot level as we're going through this, and not necessarily the specific operations of the district. So many of you have seen this continuum that we have. What we're going to be looking at tonight are two things. Number one, core purpose and core values. As Rob noted in his introduction, the board took a look at this, and quite frankly, they took a look at this last night because they had some changes and some suggestions from our March 9th meeting. I've included those in what you're going to be looking at tonight. And then I want you to ignore this continuum up here, because what we're really looking at in this second segment is an envisioned future looking at about 10 to 15 years out. I would also agree with something that Rob said a few minutes ago. When you're looking at putting this together, it is going to impact the district on a longer term basis, right? Because whatever you do between now and 10 or 15 years, or now and 3 or 5, 10, 15, it's going to impact what happens after that. And I think all of you, I always like to tell people that, number one, it's important that you're part of this process. You also have to be thinking about, and I don't care if you're here as a trustee, as an administrator, as a member of the certified, classified, community member, parent, you always want to be thinking about leaving any organization that you care about deeply in a better place than where you found it, okay? So keep that in mind as well. What you're trying to do is improve upon what you have right now. So with that, this is really a more simplified version of what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be quickly, and Hatton's going to run the logistics of getting us into smaller groups. We're going to be looking at what currently is a draft core purpose and core values. And then we're going to be, the real focus of tonight's meeting is on this area here. Who are we and where are you going? We're not quite to the 3 to 5 year timeline or the short-term strategies, okay? We probably will do that in April. But for tonight, we're going to be looking at everything above this line, okay? Core purpose and core values and big audacious goal. So when you're talking about, and I'll just speak to this very quickly. When you're talking about core ideology, you have to remember that your core purpose and your core values, they're not selected. It's not as though you're setting goals for yourself. You're actually discovering who you are and what's important to you, okay? And even though a lot of times when you're talking about core purpose and core values, and in fact, we had this discussion last night at the board meeting, you are going to have statements, and you will see from the drafts, that you want to make sure that what's really important to you stands out front and center. Can you improve in anything that you identify? Absolutely. But what you're trying to accomplish with your core ideology, it's not an unattained goal. It's something that you hold so near and dear to your heart that you don't give it up for anything. And we've spent a lot of time, and I have to give kudos to Rob on this. He did not want us to move forward, and I know why and appreciate it, until we get that part of this strategic plan down. And the reason for that is that everything else flows from your core ideology. If you miss the core ideology, quite frankly, you're probably going to miss the mark on the rest of this plan that we're trying to put together. So that's a really important component before we start talking about goals. Remember, core ideology is not goal driven. It is who you are, what you stand for. And I said a few minutes ago that it's planting the flag, and quite frankly, that's exactly what it is. So remember, core purpose is any organization's, in your instance, your school district's fundamental reason for being. It is important in terms of the day-to-day work that all of you do. It taps into your idealistic motivations and gets at the deeper reason for your particular district's existence. I know that we've had a couple of these Zoom calls and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was with some of the administrative group when they said, this doesn't, and this is a previous draft, where they indicated that the core purpose was not unique to Missoula County Public Schools, that it could be for any public school system. So we went back and we looked at that. And we'll show you the draft here in a minute because you're going to be discussing it. But you always want to remember that your district exists because you are unique. Because if you weren't unique, we wouldn't be here on this call, and Missoula County Public Schools would not be serving the number of students that you're serving. Every school system, every organization has its own core purpose. I'm going to flip through this real quickly in terms of the criteria. The other component to the core ideology are your core values. And I always think about these, and I think that this second bullet here says it better than anything. When you're talking about core values, you're really talking about things that you care about and articulating how you're going to conduct yourselves as you are pursuing your core purpose or mission. What do you expect of yourselves? And what do you expect of other people as you're moving along in this process? I can tell you from being with the School Boards Association for 20 plus years now, our board and our staff have been doing this since 2002. And every time we meet, we talk about core purpose and core values. Is everything that we're doing as an association, is it aligned with this? And if it's not, you shouldn't be doing it, okay? That's how important core ideology is. Even if it might negatively impact the district in some fashion, and you never want to negatively impact students that you're serving, but this core ideology is really important. I think what it does also is it holds your feet to the fire so that everything you're doing, again, if you discover that you're doing something that isn't aligned with this, you have to ask yourselves, why are you doing it in the first place? Are you doing it to appease somebody? And if you are, then it's probably taking you off track. And remember, this is a collaborative process. This is not done in a vacuum. So the other exercise that we're going to be talking about tonight is that long-term envision future, looking at about 10 to 15 years out. Again, it has to be aligned with your core purpose and core values. And here's what I want you to think about when you break out into your smaller groups. Remember that when you're talking about envision future, you don't want to be just thinking about continuing what you're doing right now, okay? That's not really visionary strategic planning. That is reacting to things that you know right now, right? And again, using the example of a year ago, we didn't know that we were going to be in the middle of a pandemic. We didn't know the lessons that we learned as a result of that pandemic. And so I want you to think as you're going through that, I want you to think outside of the box. And remember that when you're talking about an envisioned future of any organization or public school, it shouldn't be easily achievable. And that's why I say, don't just be thinking about things that you know and continuing that. What I want you to be thinking about, and this is not easy. I've been through it a number of times and it doesn't get any easier. When you're thinking about 10 to 15 years out, what you should be thinking about is, what are those children, quite frankly, that aren't even in your school system yet? What is it that you want for them when they're reaching the age of 17 and 18? What do you envision for them? And let's face it, you know, with the age of technology, and Glenn Tecker, who we work with, and quite frankly, I think he's correct. You know, this pandemic has pushed us forward in terms of the use of technology by 10 years, right? Many of you are probably still remote working. I don't think anybody saw that coming. And then you have to think about, too, the way that technology If you didn't have technology to service your students during this pandemic, guess what? They would have been uneducated. So there's a lot of things that I want you to be thinking about as we go through these exercises tonight. So I'm going to stop this screen share, and I'm going to pull up another document, because this is the document that you, let's see here. This is the document that you're going to be discussing in your small groups, okay? Can everybody see that? So what you have up here is, and again, this is refined as of today, based upon the input from the board last night. So you'll see we have here a draft core purpose, okay? That is what you are and what you stand for. And then you have draft core values here. So when you get into your small groups, and I don't want you spending all of your time on this in your small groups because we actually need to move forward, but we want your input. And by input, I would say, is the consensus of your group at least a thumb sideways on moving forward with what you see here? If there's something glaring that you say, this is not right, we have to speak up, then of course your group can report out. I want to make sure that when you report out, that it represents not the individual perspective and opinions, but the consensus of your group, okay? So be thinking about that as you are going through these discussions. And I probably hadn't, can you maybe, I think I sent this document to you earlier. You might want to, if you can, put a link to it in the chat so that everybody has it.
Yeah,
And
I'll get it in there.
okay, so then the second piece of this is still in draft form in terms of the long-term envisioned future of the district. And you'll see that there is a big audacious goal. And then there are several vivid descriptors about what your world, what your school system looks like in 10 to 15 years. So the whole purpose of tonight is to get a new set of eyes on this, because this was developed again last February. And I just remembered right before we got on this call that we actually had the administrative team look at these areas, and they had some changes that I will incorporate. But I think in terms of the larger group, we want your input on these. And again, if your group, you may have somebody or a couple of people in your group that don't like things, make sure that you're coming to consensus. And again, what we're looking at is if you can at least give a thumb sideways so that we can move on, that would be wonderful. If not, make sure that somebody in your group, number one, records the work of your group. And then what we're going to do when Hatton takes us out of our groups is we're going to have one person, and it can either be the person that's taking the notes or somebody else, give a summary of the work of your group. And then what we're planning on doing from here, just so you know, we will look at what you did tonight. We're planning on sending out a survey. And for those of you that were at the February 2020 meeting, you might remember that we did a megatrends analysis where we were looking at demographics, business and economic climate, politics and social values, legislation and regulation, and technology and science. Rather than spending time doing that tonight, we're going to send out a survey. And I think that that's the best use of your time before we meet on, I think it's April 20th, if I have my dates correct. So again, the work that you're going to be doing tonight, and we're going to give you, I would say, at least a half hour and probably closer to 45 minutes. I want to leave enough time to report out. And I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time and that we're done by 8 o'clock or even earlier than that. Okay. So what Hatton is going to do right now is she, I think, has everybody assigned to groups. You're going to be in a group, and I think, Hatton, the way that we have it set up is that you have the trustees spread around from groups and also the some of the administrative staff, right? So that we have a good mix of people in each group.
Yep, that's right. You should each have about 5 or 6 people in your group, and there'll be a cabinet member who can help facilitate the discussion. And as Deb said, choose a reporter and a recorder. If anybody has trouble opening the PDF that's in the chat, just message me and I can always email it to you directly.
And Rob or Hatton, do you have anything else before we break out into smaller groups?
Well, I think as you proceed through this exercise, what we tried to remind the board, which I know is very, very difficult, but would encourage you not necessarily to wordsmith the document, because we could probably spend, the next 2 hours wordsmithing a lot of these things. And we obviously want to make sure we capture your thoughts and ideas, but really the goal is to look at the, like Deborah said, sort of that 30,000 foot level. Did we capture the basis of what you're thinking is important? And then obviously we may not have the words exactly as you would have written them, but does it capture the basic idea of what you think is important?
Thank you, Rob. I forgot to mention that. Appreciate it.
Okay, super. So I'm going to send you all to your rooms. You'll get a 60-second warning when we bring you back. And Deborah, remind us again, how long do we want to stay in this first session?
So I think given the amount of time that we have, I would suggest that you do 2 things in your smaller groups before we bring everybody back. That you look at the core purpose and core values. And again, as Rob stated, this isn't a wordsmithing exercise. What we're looking at are concepts, okay? So 2 exercises while you're in your breakout rooms. Number 1 is looking at that core ideology, core purpose, core values, with the caveat that there's been quite a bit of refinement of that, even in the last 6 months. But of course, we want your input. And then I would ask, so if you're looking at maybe managing your time, and I'm the worst one of managing time, but I would tell you that maybe spend no longer than 10 to 15 minutes discussing the draft core ideology. That includes both core purpose and core values. And then I would spend the rest of your time looking at the long-term envision future. So again, if you could, I would say even limit it to 10 minutes on core ideology and then spend the rest of your time, because there's quite a bit of information in the draft envision future that we want you to go through. And then what we'll plan on doing, given the fact that it is 6:36, is in Hatton, maybe we can give everybody a 10-minute warning at 7:15.
Yep, you bet.
Because I want to make sure that we have enough time for people to report out and, quite frankly, hear what other people thought of the work. So if that works.
Okay, sounds great. And you'll be able to chat me if anybody's having trouble in their breakout rooms. I'll send you all there now.
Yay, you're all back.
We did it.
Nice job, Hatton. So before we start off with group 1, make sure that the individual that you assign to be the recorder, that I would ask you to make sure that Hatton, do you want to collect those, or Rob, do you want to collect those and get those to me?
Yeah, if folks can email them to me, that would be super. You will all have my email from messages I've sent you, and it's also in tonight's calendar invite.
Can everybody do that was the designated recorder? So we can make sure that we review those and make adjustments as necessary.
I saw some thumbs up. Thank you.
Okay. So let's start out with group one then. I don't know who was the recorder in group one, but if you could, if you don't have yourself unmuted, if you could unmute and give everybody a summary of what you discussed, that would be awesome.
I think we were group one, weren't we, Hatton? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Robitaille. I'm the principal at Paxton Elementary, and in my group were Amy Shattuck, Robin Shakota, Casey Dernberger, and Kevin Richland from Willard Alternative High School. So we had a great discussion. In terms of the core statement, I'm just going to kind of go in order of what we were asked to do. We agreed, everyone agreed that the word inspire was important to have in there. And some comments where it's more important to teach the love of learning than content specific, because that evolves and changes over time as we do curriculum review. Also, empower and prepare were words that were appreciated. In terms of the 6 core ideology or the categories, our group appreciated that student-centered was number 1. We think that was intentional, and hope it is. We did wonder about the sequence of the 2 through 6 and wondered if that's important, or after student-centered, is it just more random? And just had a question about that. Amy clued us in that the safety and inclusion were combined at one point, but then were broken apart because felt like inclusion was a bigger topic than just kids feeling safe about who they are and can be that person at school. We didn't get all the way through the long-term envision future. Well, we were fine with the nurture locally and globally minded citizens. We thought it felt pretty aligned with Missoula as a community. Apparently a couple members in our team had been part of that wordsmithing fun and games where the word nurture was discussed at length, and we didn't want to get into that, but we just wondered if that was the best word or not, but we know that wasn't our task tonight. We did start on the descriptions, and appreciated that enhanced learning opportunities was first. A member of our group, or more than one member of our group, would like art moved up on the list if it is indeed a priority list. It was noted, since we had Kevin and Casey on the call, that when we think about enhanced learning opportunities and alternative programming is listed, that we were wondering about, will our funding model change in order to accomplish these goals? Because, for instance, Willard has a waiting list and has had a waiting list ever since Kevin's been there, for sure, that he could speak to. And then just that limit of, if we have a good program and we have the capacity to expand that program into other schools, can funding follow that? And I guess the only other topic of conversation based on funding that we had was, I guess not necessarily a concern, but a perception that so much of our school schedule is driven by our bus schedule. And that is unfortunate when we're thinking about big goals and vision, that we're limited by that component. That's all I have.
Great, nice work. Great input. Let's see, in the interest of time, First of all, I'll allow a few minutes. Does anybody have any response to what you heard from group one? And I would say maybe only if you disagreed with it, and it's okay if you do.
I just have a question. Julie, did you say the bus schedule? Okay, I thought so.
Yeah. She did.
Yeah. Good point.
So Julie, you'll make sure that you get Hatton your notes. Perfect. Okay, so who was the recorder? Oh, cute kitty. Who was the recorder for group number 2? I guess maybe recorder and reporter.
I think that was us. I think Hatton, if you can.
Yep, you got it, Burley. That's your group.
So the first thing we identified was that wordsmithing is very challenging. So, but we gave it the sideways thumb up or sideways thumb. We felt like it was a little vague and generic, but it was probably we understood that you can't be too specific, that all the specifics are to follow. We really like the words equity and inclusion. I felt like that was really good. Sustainability, again, was mentioned later on in the document, but we brought that up early, so but identified it later. And then our group believed that, you know, the school system is a positive extension of our community. That's important to us. And then what is a higher education? Or high equity or quality of education mean? Sorry, I got my dog barking here. And then how does this all relate to furthering education? What's the next step? Preparing them for multiple pathways to graduation and beyond graduation. And then, like I said, what's the next steps? We spend a majority of, we like to see somewhere in there that, you know, the district, we spend the majority of our resources on the most significant amount of kids and impact the most significant amount of kids as we possibly can, rather than less kids. And then what is, on the big audacious goal we talked about, what does global mean? What is it the same for all grade levels? Is it different for all grade levels? And then we talked a lot about culture, pretty much to wrap up our conversation, and how that is included in our curriculum. When we understand Native American Studies or any Ed for All is a part of the school district, but what other cultures could be also part of that, and how could we be better at bringing that to the forefront in education?
Good. Nice discussion. Any questions or comments of Burley or group number 2? No, you guys all want to get off this call as quickly as possible, I can tell. So Burley, will you make sure that Hatton gets your notes?
Of course.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see, who is the recorder and probably reporter for group number 3?
So group 3 again was Elise, Cohen, Nicole, Sienna, Tom, and Melina.
So I took the notes, but I firmly said I was not reporting. So I just want to make that clear with my group, but I will kickstart it and then welcome the rest of my group to weigh in and add to the conversation. We had a really rich conversation. So in our group was 2 members of our school board, and then a leader in arts, a leader from our Missoula College, and a leader in our community. So with all of us together, we had some really rich dialogue. We all agreed that we gave it thumbs up or side thumbs up, and believe that this was well written. I think Tom said it best when he spoke about it being really well suited to the Missoula community, and that it really represented our strong ideals and something that we can all really grab onto. We then got into a really long conversation about the equity piece and inclusion and really what that means. And we had a really good, thoughtful, reflective conversation about whether or not the words were strong enough and were specific enough to what we need to plan for in the future. And I think Trustee Mercer said it best with, Missoula is really growing. A lot of money's coming into our community. We are seeing a shift in our entire community. And so how much more do we need to be more specific and articulate about what we want to see in our educational community around equity and inclusion and things like that? So that's where our conversation went to. Sienna made a good point about just that notion of ongoing learning, and we want to create students who in our community continue to be learners and even give back and teach others what they've learned. And so didn't know if that could be an added component or something, but that notion of the purpose of students being contributors to our community and doing so through teaching others. And then lastly, we just talked about how it's really important to get this right, because it does then service our verbiage for like the policies and practices that we're writing through like our I value committee and work like that really guides what we do next. So my 9-month-old has some things to say about that as well. She agrees as a future MCPS student. And then with that, I guess I would just invite any of the rest of our group members to help to report out.
Do we get to see your 9-month-old?
Yes, the other group did for sure. I'm sure she'll come back up in a second.
Any other comments from group 3? Sounds like you did a great job, not only recording, but reporting.
I'd like to see Nina.
Hey, it's a good joke and it's a good reminder. We've done some intentional work around our buildings of putting pictures of our students up, because when we meet as adults, yes, that's what it's all about, all of our work.
Sweet.
She says, hug me on her pajamas. So there you go. The future of MCPS.
Cute. All right, so nothing else from group 3 then. What about group 4? Who was the recorder and more likely than not the reporter?
I think that's David Brott, and I want to just give Dave kudos in his everlasting competition with Burley. I have already received your notes. Well done.
So I'm going to drop Mike and I'm done. So, and I actually, I'm realizing that I just kind of started doing it. I actually didn't talk to the group. So again, anybody within our group wants to shut me up or add some additional stuff, please don't even hesitate.
All right, the Zoom call is over. Goodbye.
So the core value, when we started out at the top, everybody thought it did a nice job. The core purpose, rather, of embracing what everybody talked about. One of the things that came up is there isn't really a discussion. It comes down later, but about health, physical and mental, environmental, and just overall health for our students and staff. The core values, again, people like them thought they incorporated the conversations the groups had and liked the word diversity, that we embrace diversity. Most of our conversation was on the envisioned future, in talking about the big audacious goal. One of the comments was regarding the word excellence at the end of it as being a bit vague. the suggestion made was to drop it all together. Also, one of the other kind of generalized comments was that the bolded sections that before they got to the specifics were pretty wordy, and sometimes took multiple times to read. So it wasn't about wordsmithing, it was just about readability. In the enhanced learning section, we talked about potentially adding food and nutrition education, outdoors, green schools, talked about that the phrase alternative programs really is just a throwaway phrase. What does it actually even mean? About do we want to, now my dog is coming in and trying to get my attention. Have talked about intentional effort to get kids outside and off screens. And then the phrase in there about the equitable opportunities, we were thinking that that actually should be bolded and perhaps incorporated as part of the audacious goal. So maybe replace the word excellence that we talked about above and adding equitable opportunities in there, since that's been something we've been discussing. The section on school environment, they were saying there's that parenthetical about middle and high school health, mental health. They said take that out. We do trauma-informed education in all of our grades, so that parenthetical was really just unnecessary. Again, this is a really wordy, bolded section, but it's difficult. And one of the suggestions was where it says students had created a school environment, and then where income and ethnicity are not predictors of success. Maybe just take out where income and ethnicity are not predictors of success and just go create a school environment that is inclusive, safe, and give students, staff, and parents from there, just to make it a little bit more readable. Under the staff valued section, we discussed about maybe being specific when it identifies having counselors, but maybe actually identifying saying school counselors, because counselors can mean multiple things. And it's important to make sure that we have an adequate number of actual school counselors. Communication section down below, we use the term parents throughout. It was brought up that maybe that's not a good phrase, that maybe we should talk about families, other caregivers, that parents can be, can be too limiting. And then finally, on expectations below in the community, again, we talk about nutritional programs, but is that about feeding kids, or do we want to expand that, talking about nutritional education? So I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. Is there anybody else within my group that wanted to add or correct things that I might have said?
Looks like you're off the hook, Dave. Nice job, by the way. Any questions of group number 4?
It's like Gabe has her hand up.
I have maybe a comment or a thought about that idea that the income and ethnicity not being predictors of success could be removed from that. And I almost wonder if actually that could be part of our big audacious goal, because I think that that is actually an important thing to articulate, but I agree that it doesn't quite make sense in that, but it might be well served up above.
Okay.
It looks like Scott Chook also has his hand raised.
Hi, thank you, Haddon. Dave mentioned something that we already do that you thought might not need to be there. And I noticed there's more than a couple of things on there that we're already doing. But I think it's important that those things are there so that we can perpetuate doing those things. And I think it's good to not only mention that we're doing those things, but maybe people need to know that we're doing these things. So not just doing these things, but like, maybe it's not a bad idea to toot our own horn that we're doing these things.
I just want to address that quickly. I think the reason why we want to take it out is because it says not wait until middle and high school. So that's saying that they don't already do it in elementary. where elementary is doing it and doing it well with preventative measures. And so that's why we wanted to take it out, because it assumes that they don't do it at the elementary level.
I see. Thank you.
Good question and good clarification. Okay, who was the designated reporter for Group 5?
That's me. All right, so we also felt like the core value, or the shoot, I should pull it back up. The main statement, we were happy with how that was generally written. Our core values, we talked quite a bit about those, and tried not to wordsmith, but did have some thoughts. We were a little concerned that the way that equity and inclusion and actually safety are articulated right now are maybe don't feel strong enough, and just want to know that there's going to be either further articulation of those later, or to reword those so that they're not just feeling like lip service, but that they're actually actionable values for us. We talked about student-centered, and also feeling like that might leave out the importance of actual peer relationships and even peer learning together, and also making sure that and it's sort of in there by the word challenged, but that failure and struggling is a really important part of education right now, our understanding of how kids learn. So making sure that that's articulated well. We talked about whether or not the order of the core values could be moved around because they feel a little bit jumpy. So we talked about having student-centered, relationship, equity, inclusion, innovation, and safety, because it feels a little disjointed right now. And then we also, Jean from Garden City Harvest brought up the idea that respect is not articulated throughout there, and that is a strong word. It's a value of Garden City Harvest, and that we kind of wanted to include that. So we talked about adding that to the inclusion statement. And we also talked about trust as a strong value that we maybe would love to see thrown in somewhere. And then Adria had the great idea that actually it would be great to have some sort of graphic to also visualize these values and how they're related to each other. We did actually then want to add the word learning in somewhere, because that is a little bit different than education. So we talked about adding learning to the core purpose, or to the student-centered statement. We really tried not to wordsmith, but we just had some words that we felt were important to throw in. And then we talked about adding in some sentence or phrase around cultural humility and culturally responsive practices and environments into one of our, I think into the second desired future, to really articulate that more specifically, particularly as we talked about with our growth of diverse refugee families, and in response to our important and significant Indigenous population. We also talked about sustainability, and though it's mentioned at the very bottom in sort of a administrative facilities level, that should maybe be in that second portion again, around that being an educational focus in teaching and learning. And then I think that's it. We did talk a little bit about how all of the desired outcomes are really great. They don't always necessarily feel like they completely link to that audacious goal, and that maybe the audacious goal as a goal needs to be reworked, because right now it feels a little bit like just a continuation of our core purpose. All the desired outcomes seem like good goals. Anyone want to chime in?
And Gabe, thank you. I got your email as well. I appreciate you sending those notes over.
Nice job on Group 5. Any questions or comments? Can all of you see how this would be much different if there were a, small group of 10 or 12 or even 15 people putting this together? So just want to reiterate that your input is really valued. All right, no questions of group 5. Who is the reporter on group 6?
Hi, Deborah, that's me. I'm Susan Tower. I'm the executive director of the Missoula Education Foundation. And in my group were Casey Ballou, Monty Grease, Virginia Haynes, and Russ Lodge. So in general, we discussed that the core purpose is it's all right, but there were concerns about the words creativity and curiosity not being included, and I think they were in a previous version of the core purpose and they were taken out. So one suggestion we had thought about was to put those words into the bullet point, the core value bullet point innovation, as one place they could go to without wordsmithing too much. I think another kind of overarching concern we had is that is the word learning is still not there, and I know another group mentioned that. So I guess it is a difference between education and learning, but that was something else that we had discussed, was trying to find a way to slip learning back in there. And then for the big audacious goal, we just suggested a completely different worded version to provide pathways that nurture curiosity and fuel creative and critical thinking. Because I think when we looked at the second half of the sentence with inclusion, strong leadership, and excellence, those are hard to measure. And so it just was a suggestion to try to make it maybe flow a little bit better.
Will you read that one more
The other
time?
thing, sure, I guess I flew through that. To provide pathways that nurture curiosity and fuel creative and critical thinking. There was also some concern under the vivid description of the desired future, the first bolded section, that we'd like to have it read, MCPS has enhanced learning opportunities for all students rather than just students. And then it was noted that the very first bullet point under that of individual learning plans for each student would be virtually impossible to ever meet and would perhaps detract from the idea of education and learning. I can't even imagine what that would look like in one classroom, let alone across an entire school district. However, we really all did agree we loved the student ownership of their learning plan. The student ownership for their learning and for their education is a really important, empowering statement that should absolutely stay in there. And then let's see, we also had one more. Multiple pathways for individual graduation goals. We don't really know what that means. Does it mean that there are multiple exceptions that can be made for students to graduate? Are there exceptions that can be made with the credits, the number of credits they have, the number of prerequisites versus elective credits? So there was a suggestion to just reword the whole thing as supporting all students to meet graduation goals, because it seemed like a slippery slope sort of statement. And then with pretty much every other group has mentioned that much larger bolded section further down the page. So we had just suggested breaking up the sentence so that after the word success, there's a period, and then we start a new sentence repeating a school environment that is inclusive, safe, and gives students, et cetera, et cetera. So tried not to wordsmith, but I think sometimes just trying to read and understand was so confusing that sometimes punctuation matters. We see those little memes on Facebook. So, so that's what we had. Did I get everything, group 6?
Nice job. I don't mind that you tear my draft work apart, really. Just kidding. No, it's all good stuff. Pat does it.
Do I need to lock my doors tonight, Deborah?
No, you're fine. Pat does it to me all the time. Any final questions or comments about the exercise?
Susan, in yours, you mentioned the multiple pathways thing. And when I read that, it made me think about Willard and how students who maybe don't learn in ways that the typical student does seem to have good success at Willard because they can kind of, individualize their plans and learn in a way that works for them.
I didn't even interpret it that way. So thanks for that suggestion and that interpretation.
I had one other comment, because one of the things our group had brought up as well is that maybe this language, it's strong language, but it's still a little bit vague. So just thinking about some of the things that other people have been bringing up too, I know that it's too many sentences and we need to be more concise perhaps, but something along the lines of creating a lust for learning through diverse experiences for all students, celebrating differences and teaching there are multiple pathways to success, and helping students feel secure and confident in their next steps.
Rebecca, can you do me a favor and make sure that Hatton gets that?
Yeah.
And it looks like Cohen has his hand up, sorry.
I just keep going back and forth about in this envision future, like, do the individual things need to be more concrete? People are interpreting in different ways. Some are just after school and summer programs. Does that mean through 5 o'clock, we will commit to be able people to go to work? I mean, or do we need to be more concrete about what, this is your great world, student, regardless of home location, can take any class in the district. That's a concrete goal. It isn't just equality of opportunity. So I don't know. I don't know what your point is. I would also say this as a comment, like our group, not to sell us out, but I don't think we got anywhere at all into these really, right? There just wasn't time. I don't think we had in our head what this great future was like. And so I don't feel like we had enough time to really give you my perspective. My perspective is we didn't have enough time.
No, and I think that point is both of your points are valid. I think what we could do, remember that next steps are to, gather, synthesize the work that all of you have done tonight. But in listening to you, and remember I mentioned at the beginning that we were going to be sending out a survey on the megatrends analysis. But I'm wondering, and I'll visit with Hatton and Rob about this, just in terms of logistics, we may want to have another survey for input on the envisioned future of the district. Because I want to make sure that, people feel like they have enough time. Although I know that on Zoom, people get fatigued fairly easy. I know that I do. But let me visit with Rob and with Hatton and see if we can provide for additional opportunities for input on that before we move on. And listen, when you're talking about 10 to 15 years out, it's never easy, right, to think about that far out. One thing we do know, though, about public education, for any of you that have been around a while, you guys have a lot of flexibility, and people always say, well, we don't have much flexibility, right? We have statutes and we have the accreditation standards, those are just the bare minimum. You can do a lot of things above what state and federal and the Board of Public Education regulations are. And I know that you guys do that, but you want to be thinking about that too, that those are really just a floor. So with that, the game plan then is to put a survey or surveys together. And I also understand that if surveys are too long, people tend not to really think about them. So I think the best way to go if we're going to do that would be to do it in 2 surveys, not 1. But what we'll plan on doing, and Hatton, remind me, our next big group meeting is on April 20th. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. And so we were thinking about sending out a survey midweek to late next week and giving people about a week and a half to respond so we could analyze it before the next big meeting.
Okay, so be on the watch for that. The other thing that you have to remember that as we're going through this process, and I think it's great that we have the input from a number of you, remember that this process is intended to be ever changing. You know what I'm saying? That it's intended to evolve, and it may not be perfect. You're never going to get something perfect with 30 people. But what we're trying to do is to put something together that gives everybody a path for moving forward. Okay. And I do appreciate all of your comments in terms of, it sounds like we're pretty close on the core purpose and core values, maybe a few tweaks. And it sounds like we need to do a little more work on the envision future. And then remember, the last piece of this, aside from the barriers or drivers discussion, which is the megatrends analysis, i.e. looking at things that are happening around you that are going to impact your ability to be successful, is looking at your 3 to 5 year priorities and then identifying 1 to 2 year strategies. Okay, so that's sort of the game plan for moving forward from here. Hatton, Rob, do you guys, either of you have any comments before we let people off the Zoom call?
No, I I appreciate the discussion tonight and the thoughts. I do want everyone to know that it's important to us that we take the time on this. I don't necessarily want to rush through it. At the same time, Deborah's right. We want to get to a point where we can have something down so that we can move forward with the board and with the community. So, but your input is very valuable. I learned a lot just by listening tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add the reminder, if you have friends or colleagues that couldn't participate tonight, I'll have this up on our YouTube channel in a day or 2. You can access our YouTube channel at the very bottom of our websites. There's a little YouTube button. And for our staff, it'll be linked in the staff newsletter on Friday. And for families, we'll get it linked in social media soon. So if anybody missed out and they want to watch, they can take a look on YouTube.
Thank you, Hatton. Well, with that, we're 4 minutes early. We could hang out if you want to for 4 minutes and look at each other. And I'm sure that you have better use of your time. So anyhow, appreciate all of you being on the call. And again, watch out for a survey. And then we'll put an agenda out for the April 20th meeting, and we'll plan on moving forward. Thank you so much.